This video is sponsored by Geek Fuel. Stay till the end to learn more and use the link in the description to sign up. Greetings everyone, my name is Sign. So, Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue. You know what's interesting? I've never actually played the original Red and Blue until very recently. I mean, I played the remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, but despite growing up with the show, my first Pokemon game was actually Pokemon Crystal. However, after the recent craze of Pokemon Go that has relighted the fire under my childhood nostalgia, I've decided I want to do a 10TYDK for this franchise finally. And what better place to start than from the beginning? So, let's play a game. If you guys don't want anything while watching this video, I want you to give it a like. But if you already knew all 10 facts before watching, I want you to give it a dislike, guilt-free. Because if you knew everything, it means I didn't do my job properly. And of course, this video will be spoiling not much of the story, because there really isn't a story to spoil. So without any further ado, here are 10 things you didn't know about Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue. So in Celadon City, did you ever think about why the prize house for the game corner was in an entirely separate building off to the side of the main building? Well, apparently, this design choice has a basis in reality. You see, Japanese gambling law forbids people winning money for playing Pachinko, so in order to get around that, most Pachinko parlors allow you to exchange your winnings for small slits of gold encased in plastic, and then you take those next door to the totally separate building where you can trade those slits of gold for money. Now, those buildings are still owned by the parlor owners, but since gambling technically isn't happening in the Pachinko parlor itself, it's totally okay. Laws are weird, man. So this is interesting. Did you know there are only 37 unique sounds for all 151 Pokemon cries? However, in order to differentiate each sound, audio effects like modifying speed and pitch are applied to those 37 base sounds in order to make the cries different for every Pokemon. Well, almost every Pokemon. Unfortunately, there's only so much you can do with audio effects in games as old as this, and so a few Pokemon do share the same cries. Examples include Charizard and Rhyhorn, Ditto and Poliwag, and Goldeen and Caterpie. Trivia question time! So, what do you think is the worst move in Pokemon Red and Blue? Now, I'd play the Jeopardy music here, but I feel like you've already chosen the answer. And to the 95% of you who probably picked it, no, it's not Splash. Sure, Splash is useless, but at least it's just useless. No, the actual worst move in the game is Focus Energy, because due to a programming error, Focus Energy actually reduces the user's critical strike chance instead of raising it, which makes it far worse than just being useless. So as you might remember, Pokemon Red and Blue only allowed a 10-character limit when nicknaming a Pokemon. Well, due to the game's programming, this limit actually seems to be hard built into the game and applied to the developers as well, which, for example, is likely why the name Victory Bell is only spelt with one L, and Feraligatr has no O. But this limitation also, most likely, robbed us of one of the single coolest Pokemon names ever. So, did you know that in Red and Blue's beta period, Gyarados was going to be nicknamed Skullkraken? And that can obviously be read either as Cracking Skulls or Skull Kraken, referencing the mythical giant squid. Unfortunately, that name is 11 characters long and wouldn't fit properly. So it was either changed because of that, or because skull cracking was not considered appropriate in a kid's game. Aha! But the Pokemon renaming didn't end with Gyarados, because there were actually several Pokemon that got renamed before the official release of the English version. And sure, Skullkraken is by far the most interesting and the most awesome, but there were a lot more. For example, Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar were going to be called Spirit, Spectre, and Phantom. Tangela was going to be Medusa, and Lapras was going to be Ness, referencing the Loch Ness Monster. But what's really interesting is that Paris was originally going to be named Parasite, spelt with a Y, and it's entirely possible the reason for the name change was in order to avoid copyright issues with the 1990 manga series of the same name. So at the start of the game, when you're being lectured by Professor Oak about how awesome Pokemon are and how much fun you're about to have, he sends out a Nidorino as an example of a Pokemon. But did you notice the cry that plays actually belongs to a Nidorina? One of my absolute favorite things to find for lists like these is stuff the developers probably wanted to remove, but forgot about prior to release, like that secret button in Portal 2. And here we have another example of that. Because did you know that the hotel in Celadon City actually has an invisible PC? If you stand one space down from the top right corner of the first room and press A, you'll be able to boot it up and use it like a normal PC. Now, we really don't know the reason why a PC would even be here in the first place, but if I had to guess, I'd say the hotel does sort of resemble a Pokemon Center. So maybe the programmers accidentally put a PC here, realized the mistake, removed the graphic, but forgot to remove its functionality? I've got no clue, but it's definitely fun to speculate. Ah, Lavender Town. Source of many childhood nightmares and birthplace of countless creepypastas. Now, usually on your first run-through of the game, you'll proceed up the Pokemon Tower until your path is blocked by a ghost, which you can't fight until you have the Sliff Scope. Now, getting the Sliff Scope requires you to take a detour through Celadon City, and to fight your way through all of Team Rocket, and no one really has time for that, you know? So you could do it that way, but did you know there's an interesting glitch that allows you to skip that process entirely? So, for whatever odd reason, using the Pokédoll item during the fight with the Ghost Marowak will make it flee the fight and pass on to the afterlife, just like if it had been defeated. However, this glitch was of course later fixed in Pokemon Fire Red and Pokemon Leaf Green. So, this trivia bit earns the number 2 spot just because I've seen it happen so many times and I have never realized it. So, when you go into battle, whether it be a random encounter or a trainer fight, there'll be some seizure-inducing flashes on screen before the fight actually begins. But did you know those scene transitions aren't actually chosen at random, but instead are based on what type of battle it is, the level of the first Pokemon in your party in relation to the level of the Pokemon you've encountered, and whether or not you're in a dungeon map. For example, the double circle transition will happen if you encounter a wild Pokemon, you're in the overworld map, and the enemy Pokemon is 3 or more levels lower than your first Pokemon. Whereas, the single circle transition will happen if you encountered a wild Pokemon, you're in the overworld map, and the enemy Pokemon is at least 3 levels higher than your first Pokemon. There are 12 different transition types depending on which of those 3 criteria are met, and that's way too many to go over here. But now that you know it's not random, be sure to look out for it when you're playing yourself. Disclaimer. The number 1 spot isn't for the most obscure trivia bit, but rather the one I think is the coolest. So, I'm not exactly an edumacated person, but it really doesn't take one to realize red and blue aren't exactly well made, especially when you compare it to any recent Pokemon game. They were programmed in an extremely basic programming language called assembly, and so far as I can tell, the code is balanced like a house of cards and is being held together with Pritt Stick. So if the slightest thing happens the game doesn't expect, the crazy shit begins, and probably doesn't end until the save file corrupts. And there are a billion different insane glitches you can pull off to do exactly that. But there is one specific glitch that really stands out to me, just for how crazy it is. So, you guys most likely know about the Mew glitch, right? I don't want to go into the whole thing here, but suffice it to say, it allowed you to catch not only a Mew, but basically any Pokemon in the game extremely easily. But there's an extension of this glitch called the Zaz glitch, which will happen if, while trying to do the Mew glitch, you encounter a Ditto and have it transform into a Pokemon with a special stat higher than 250, like my Kadabra here. Then when you go to complete the Mew glitch, just watch. So, where to even begin here? First of all, neither of our trainer sprites are displaying properly, all but one of his Pokemon have fainted, and the only one left is poisoned, and suddenly, 3 of my Pokemon are also poisoned. I'm now fighting a Charizard instead of the Poliwag I'm supposed to be fighting. Its name is now Random Shit M Random Shit, he must have had cruel parents, and its health bar is longer than the screen is wide. Kadabra has now been transformed into a level 153 Bulbasaur, as has every other Pokemon on my team aside from Pidgeotto, who never was one to give in to peer pressure, and 3 of my attacks have been replaced with Explosion, and when I use it... And that's not even the end of it! Once the attack stops, I send out Blastoise, who is also now a level 153 Bulbasaur. And then I try to attack, and Blastoise wakes up from its poisoning, and the screen goes white, and the game crashes. Was the entire game just Blastoise's dream? Is this all just Blastoise's dream? Seriously, what in the fuck is happening behind the scenes to cause all of this? I have no idea, but what I do know is this glitch is just magical. Hey everyone, remember to leave a like if you learned something new, and of course, dislike if you already knew everything before watching, because if you did, that means I didn't do my job properly. Now, this is usually the part where I start advertising for Geek Fuel, and indeed I'm going to start doing that here in a second, but really quick I want to ask you guys a question. So, as is pretty self-evident, I take a lot of inspiration from Peanut Butter Gamer, and for the last few years now, he's done a thing every November called Zelda Month, which is basically a gigantic celebration of one of his favorite franchises, and let people know what a big impact it's had in his life. Well, I've never been much of a Zelda person, but I realize Pokemon fills a very similar hole in my own heart, and so I've been considering turning my Novembers into like a Poke-month or a Poke-vember, name pending, and I'm curious what you guys think of that, so please leave a comment below. Okay, so like I said at the start of the video, this video is sponsored by Geek Fuel, but what is Geek Fuel? Well, Geek Fuel is a monthly box service that gives you things you can actually use, like coffee mugs, magazines, hats, t-shirts, and Steam games. For example, check out all the awesome stuff that came in only 3 boxes. And the best part? If you sign up using my special link, you'll get an extra $30 bonus box with your first order that is totally on me. So really, there's no reason not to try it. So go check out geekfuel.com/sci, link down below. Anyways, that is it. I just want to thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Later. Special thanks to my lovely Patreon patrons, Matt Flowers, Isaiah Christo, Aaron Graff, Saws, Bucky, and Krista, for helping support my endeavors.